If you've seen my previous video, you know I've had the crane pump leaking a little, and that was out when the drive pump was replaced, but we figured, as in the last video or the one before that, we drained the oil from the hydraulic tank, so there was very little left, and I had my dad underneath with some buckets collecting what was coming out. At least it was a little bit faster this time around. I had to remove the filter to access some of the bolts holding the pump. And as usual, one of the adapters was spinning. We had one tool that was big enough that was cut short, so that was welded onto a bar to extend it and hold the adapter while we were able to undo the hydraulic hose. We had to remove all the hoses from the drive pump and bend them out of the way. Then we did this before with a chain and some leverage to be able to undo the bolts holding the crane pump. Was also a few smaller hoses, but I'm not going into extreme detail. A chain block and some straps around the pump and the tractor, and loosening the last of the bolts, and a little wiggling in the breaker bar, and while the filter holder is held in place with the bolts here, so that was folded out of the way. A little wiggling and pump slid right out. We had added a little silicone between the pumps since we reused the gasket here, since the kit for the dry pump didn't come with a new gasket for between the pumps. But then it was lifted out, put on a bench, and a little bit of cleaning. This time I tackled breaking it apart myself. I had found part schematics and some information online about this pump, so I felt quite confident I could pull it apart and see what it looked like without any additional help. But my hydraulic contact I talked to, because my dad's suggestion was to just pull the back plate off and with the pump still in the machine and just slab some silicone on there and put it back together, but that would have been a bad idea. He said you should have it standing upright to not have when you don't know how the pump is built, because things can start falling out. Use some plastic scrapers to gently wedge it open to have it pop out or pop up the lid enough to remove it. I'm not sure if it's this one that's called swash plate, but it's a plate that like barrel rides on. Need a little hammering here and there. Missed when I removed the push spring that pushes the adjustment plate back. That's on the other side of that lid I removed. Remove the regulator. It's just 4 small screws and a couple of O-rings sealing that. I'm not gonna touch this time around, but I want to replace all the other seals, because the regulator can be accessed once should that be any leak on that in the future, it can be accessed later. The barrel assembly, part of it is held in place on the angle plate down there with a couple of brackets and 4 bolts before it can be slid out of the housing. Everything feels super tight. All the plungers look pristine. There was a minor damage on that plate, and I started finding a little bit of metal debris in there, but I think I found where it was coming from, and it's later in this video. There is a little tricky with all the lock rings and the seal. You can see here it's pretty much like super brittle, and it was severely broken. It didn't really show that it was leaking out the shaft, because that connects to the next pump. But removing some of the lock rings here, I had to figure out that I can remove the like holder for the seal, that it was a lot more access to get to the last few lock rings. I'm not sure if that one really needed to be removed at this stage, or if that's just to get the bearing off, but that will need to be replaced. All the lock rings out, and the entire shaft and with bearing can be slid out. It looked a little worn when it's the bushing sits, but it's very, very minor. It's kind of looks stripy, but when you drag your nail across, it's nothing sharp. Try some heat on that compensator, or where the adjustment is. Tried removing some of the plugs. Most of them came undone, but this was really well stuck on there, so I will guess we will need some better heat. Here you can see it, it's a little out of focus, but the bearing is really bad. We gave it a little heat and a couple of whacks to see if it would be an easy bearing to remove, but no. So we'll probably end up cutting and cracking the bearing to remove it. Here I'm collecting some of the seals and plugs and stuff to see what it will be like to get hold of spare parts for it. My dad took on the job of changing the tire while I was off working on thinning out some of the young forest we have. Here we had a better heat source and could blast the plugs a little bit, and they started coming undone, so everything is loosened by now. Figured out that the bearings under the plate could be slid out without removing everything from inside the housing, and one looks quite bad. Still decided to see if it would be removed, and this was a little better heat source than. So it's all broken apart now. I just still figuring out some of the parts, so we'll see. Hopefully I will be able to get it back together.